So we've got a good chance to see the connective tissue proper. Now let's take a look at the specialized connective tissues, those connective tissues that are a little bit harder to recognize that they fit in with all the characteristics that we talked about with connective tissue, that is, having a specialized cell and then a ground substance with an extracellular matrix made up of ground substance and protein fibers. So it may not be so easy to recognize all that in these connective tissues. We'll start by looking at cartilage. Cartilage, the extracellular matrix, is very distinctive. So it's not something that you would confuse with anything else once you get to know it, of course. The ground substance, rather than being kind of fluid, actually has a lot of this dissolved protein polysaccharide material in it. And because you've got so much dissolved proteins and material, it gives the ground substance a really heavy, solid, gel-like kind of consistency. And it has lots of collagenous fibers embedded in that gel substance. The specialized cell is called a chondrocyte. Chondro, that prefix means cartilage. Cyte, of course, means cell. And the key characteristic for distinguishing a cartilage is that these cells are found in these small little chambers that the chondrocyte builds as it secretes the ground substance around itself. And so it kind of walls itself into this little chamber called a lacuna. I look at lacuna, I see that word, and I think lagoon, like a small little pool of water that somewhere. Or another way I think of it is the chondrocytes have their own little personal hot tub, and they're just hanging out in this little space that they create in the cartilage. And we'll see in a second, but with the chondrocyte inside of its lacuna, it gives it like eyeball-looking characteristic. So if you see the eyeballs, then you know for a fact that you've found cartilage. The entire cartilage is surrounded by a material called perichondrium. That's a dense, irregular connective tissue covering. And generally, cartilages are avascular. There may be, along the edges of cartilage, there might be some vascularization. They talk about the pink zone of cartilage where there are some blood vessels, and then the white zone of cartilage where there are no blood vessels at all. And because they're either avascular or very poorly vascularized, then cartilages are slow to repair. They don't get a good supply of nutrients and oxygen to help the repair process. There are no nerves embedded in the cartilage tissue. Now, of course, there might be nerves nearby, somewhere outside that perichondrium, but in the cartilage tissue itself, there are no nerves. And there are three types of cartilage. There's hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. And we're going to look at those three types and talk about where we might find them in the body. So we'll start with hyaline cartilage. The extracellular matrix is composed of these really closely packed collagenous fibers, but they're transparent in tissue samples. So when you look at a sample of collagen fiber, the extracellular matrix has this, and here's some extracellular matrix without any lacunae in it in this slice. You can see it kind of has this really smooth, kind of almost a glassy appearance. In fact, one of the students the other night in class said, it kind of makes me think of stained glass when I think of it. And I thought that was an excellent analogy to be able to compare to. Here we see lacunae. So there's the lacuna, and the dark spot is the chondrocyte there hanging out in its lacuna. So hyaline cartilage, even though you can't see the fibers are there. They're just transparent when we slice it and stain it. This is the most common cartilage type that we find in the body. If you put your finger on the very tip of your nose and feel deep in there at the wiggly part, that is hyaline cartilage in there. It also connects the ribs back to the sternum. So when we start working on the skeletal system, we'll see the hyaline cartilage there. it forms rings in the trachea and in the bronchi, and that helps to hold open those two tubes so that they don't snap shut when we try to breathe in. And it's also found at the growth plate in long bones. So the growth plate is near the end of the bone, but not quite at the end. So, and it is part of what allows long bones to continue growing until we reach puberty or beyond, slightly beyond puberty. And then last of all, a place that we find hyaline cartilage is at the very end of long bones as a covering there, anywhere there's a joint. So the joints are lined with hyaline cartilage, and that allows for smooth movement. If you move your elbow, it's nice and smooth because you have glassy hyaline cartilage rubbing against glassy hyaline cartilage on the two bone ends, rather than rough bone grinding against rough bone. And as that cartilage is lost, it creates real problems. That's what arthritis is the gradual degeneration of the hyaline cartilage there at the end of the long bones. Okay, so hyaline cartilage hopefully should be very easy to recognize for you because it's got that glassy, smooth appearance and all those eyeballs staring back at you. The next kind of cartilage is elastic cartilage. In elastic cartilage, the extracellular matrix is just packed with elastic fibers. So there's collagenous fibers there too, but there's a lot of this elastic fiber as well. And you can see them, the elastic fibers. Let's see if I can kind of blow it up a little bit for you. So here are elastic. Yeah, I can't draw on it when I've got it large like this. But the elastic fibers, I'll try to use that little hand. If you follow the hand, there's an elastic fiber, and here it is up where there's lots of lacunae. They stain really dark, and so the elastic fibers really show up dark purpley in the slides. We find if you put your finger up to the auricle of your ear, that's the ear flap that's out there hanging that you can go boing 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 with. That is built of elastic cartilage, and in the larynx, that's the voice box. So if you put your hand there at the very front of your throat and hum or do something, you'll feel a vibration there. That is your larynx. We have elastic cartilage there, and it's kind of stretchy because of all these elastic fibers, and so it can stretch a little bit and then return to its usual shape. In tissue samples, these elastic fibers stain really dark, and they kind of have a branching root sort of appearance. So hopefully that will help you to recognize elastic cartilage. But it is mighty distinctive as well. Again, look for the eyeballs, the chondrocytes and the lacuna, and then dark staining fibers, and you've got yourself elastic cartilage. Fibrocartilage is the last of the ones that we're going to look at, and I couldn't find a really great picture. Oh shoot, this should say fibro. Sorry. As I was making the slide, I didn't change it. So here, kind of ignore this half of the slide because all of this is hyaline cartilage on that side. Where you want to pay attention is here on this portion of the picture. Fibrocartilage is a really tough tissue. It's composed primarily of collagenous fibers with just a little ground substance in there. And then the chondrocytes are scattered about. And the lacunae are much smaller in fibrocartilage. So this is going to be a harder one to distinguish. And it frequently kind of trips students up. They want to look at that and see dense, regular connective tissue like a tendon. Or sometimes they want to look at that and see skeletal muscle. So be sure that you're separating those three different those three different tissue types from each other in your brain. So you will see a little bit of a space around each of the chondrocytes. And then the collagenous fibers are arranged usually in this kind of parallel way. So it's very dense, very tough. This is great at absorbing shock. And so we find it in the discs in between the vertebra of the spine, and they prevent the vertebra from connecting with each other, and it's got this real springy characteristic, so that as we jump up and down or walk upstairs or whatever, as we move, we do not shock the spinal cord or the vertebra. We also find it at the pubic symphysis. This is at the very front of the hip, where the two hip bones join together in the front, in the pubic area, and it connects the pubis of each hip to each other. And it's a strong but kind of flexible connection. And late in pregnancy, women will produce an enzyme. Pregnant women will produce an enzyme that will start to weaken those collagenous fibers throughout their joints. A lot of women get really loose jointed late in pregnancy, but that weakening of the pubic symphysis allows the pubic bones to kind of pull from each other. They don't separate, and the cartilage doesn't break, hopefully, doesn't tear, but it allows for a little give as the baby's head pushes its way through the opening between the two hip bones. So fibrocartilage, dense, lots of thick, strong collagenous fibers in it. Bone is also a connective tissue. There is an extracellular matrix that has very, very little ground substance, but it does have lots of collagenous fibers, and that helps to give bone its strength while replacing, instead of having a ground substance, a fluid ground substance, that ground substance is replaced instead with a very large amount of mineral salts. Calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate are the two primary mineral salts. It's a special mineral referred to as hydroxyapatite, and that gives the bones their rigidity. So without the collagenous fibers, the bones would be rigid but brittle, and without the hydroxyapatite, the bones would be very flexible, very bendy, but would still be, they'd have strength, but they wouldn't be very supportive. The long bone, there's two kinds of bony tissue, and what we're going to look at is compact bone. That's the bony tissue that we'll be looking at in our tissue samples, and we'll learn more about this when we get to the skeletal system. But this is the cross section of, here's a long bone. We're cutting through the long bone like this, and then looking at the exposed end, and the exposed end is filled with these circular, they almost look like tree trunks to me, the way that they're arranged, because you can see this ring pattern to it. And this is the way that long bones especially are developed. They grow larger. This is referred to as a single one of these tree trunk looking things is called an osteon. It's the unit of a long bone. And at the very center, this is the central canal here, so I'm leaving this one unmarred, this one so that we can compare. That's the central canal, and it has blood vessels in it, so this is all blood in here. So it's very well vascularized. The blood vessels will branch, and I'm sorry. Yeah, these are the very smallest of the blood vessels here, found in the central canal. And right here at the rings, kind of living in little lacunae, so that should tell you that there's a real connection between bone and cartilage. Inside the lacunae are the osteocytes. Now these are mature osteocytes. As the long bone is developing, we refer to the cells as osteoblasts, and they are the builders of the bone material. And they will allow, as they secrete the bony matrix, they will isolate themselves in their little lacunae. And once they are fully isolated, then they are mature, and we refer to them then as osteocytes. So bone cells, osteo means bone, bone builders grow up to become bone cells. Okay, so we can see osteocytes, we can see a central canal, we can see the rings of the bone tissue, and this is also a very distinctive view. You know, if you see the tree trunk looking things, then what you have found is a bone tissue. So let's look at a little bit at the microanatomy. So again, the osteon is the functional unit of compact bone. Oops, sorry about that. Wrong way. Osteon's the functional unit of compact bone. It has this central canal. The central canal is a space for blood vessels, for lymph vessels, and for nerves to pass. So bone tissue is well innervated as well. The bony material in an osteon is laid down in these concentric rings. The tissue of this ring is referred to as the lamellae. This means sheet. Lamella is sheet. If something is laminated, it's got several sheets of material that are all compressed together, and we think about laminated paper. It's got layers or sheets of plastic on either side that are kind of melted together and fused. So the lamellae, and you say AE always says E, so you say lamellae is these concentric layers of that bony matrix. The lacunae, lacuna is plural, is singular, lacunae are plural. Those are the cavities in the bone matrix where the osteocytes are found. And then there are these tiny little canals that will interconnect the lacuna of one osteocyte. So here's an osteocyte. There'll be little canals that connect the lacuna of one osteocyte to the lacuna of another. And this allows the osteocytes to diffuse nutrients and wastes all the way back here to the blood vessels. Or they diffuse nutrients from the blood vessels. They send wastes back to the blood vessels. Okay, so connective tissue, bone, pretty straightforward, should be easy to recognize. And then the last of the specialized connective tissues is the blood. Blood is not, it's the one that is like, it was voted least likely to be a connective tissue, but it is. What we don't see in normal blood is a lot of protein fibers. So the ground substance is the blood plasma, and rather than the proteins being fibrous, the proteins are actually dissolved in blood plasma. It's only when the blood is clotting that those dissolved bone. Dadgum, I'm still stuck on bones. Let me try that again. It's only when the blood is clotting that the proteins that are dissolved will shift and become fibrous. And so that's the process of clotting, is when we initiate the chemical reactions that cause the dissolved proteins to become fibers. The fibers then form a mesh that traps white blood cells and red blood cells and platelets, and pretty soon we have a clogged up hole. So the specialized cells that we see in blood are the red blood cells. Their job is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. They have a shape like this if we were to look at them in side view. So they're kind of larger at the ends and thin in the middle. You can kind of see that here where the middle is slightly lighter colored. So they're like a donut that has the middle filled in, but it's just real thin in the middle. There are also white blood cells. This is a white blood cell right here. So white blood cell, red blood cells, and these white blood cells can crawl around. Sometimes they're balled up like this, but they can also do this kind of dragging themselves around along the wall of the blood vessel or between cells in the tissues, and they can find stuff that doesn't belong there, debris or bacteria or some other invader, and they will ingest it and destroy it. And last of all, there are platelets. You can't really see it in them in this picture, but platelets are these little fragments of cells that have a role in blood clotting. So there you have it. 3 of the specialized connective tissues: the cartilages, bone, and blood. If you have questions, you always know how and where to find me. So give me a call, send me an email.